Hello and welcome to this month's Time Grappler Podcast with me, your host, Liam Wandi. In this podcast, I will share some of the many lessons I've learned from the various martial arts teachers I've been lucky to meet and train with over the years, thanks to the blog, The Time Grappler. I will also share some of the ideas that my training as a secondary school teacher, that's what I do for a living, has fostered in me, whether that's regarding structuring a curriculum, teaching methodology, time management, or even lesson structure for those of us who teach martial arts in any capacity. I hope you enjoy listening to these podcasts as much as I enjoy making them. So, without further ado, I hand you over to myself and this month's Time Grappler Podcast. Hello, grapplers. I think I'm going to start my podcast with that from now on. Hello, grapplers. I might change my mind. Anyway, in this month's podcast, I want to talk about something called reframing and rephrasing. It's something that we use a lot in teaching, especially one-to-one teaching, and it's something that I first heard about at university. I did a course in communication. It was part of a management kind of module I did at the Open University a few years back. Now, the module itself is called Communication and Language, and it focuses on the best, clearest way to communicate your ideas to either a person, that's the ideal one-to-one, or to a group, to a crowd. And unfortunately, as you may guess, that's where a lot of problems can happen. And the model we used at the time, the focus at the time was on encoding the ideas that you have in your head, in your brain, in your brains, into words and gestures, and how to deliver that message in the most suitable fashion for the situation, for the interaction. And the model we used, it was a very, very simple model at first glance. You look at it, it was on a diagram, and you think, well, this is too easy, this is too simple. But the fact is, the simplicity was the magic of the model. The reason it worked is because it was simple. Let me describe the model for you. So you start with one person or one entity, and that person or entity is called the sender. So that's the person who has the idea, and he or she is trying to communicate it. And then at the end of the line, you have someone called the receiver, and we're giving them the information. We're somehow trying to show them or tell them or teach them. So an arrow comes out of the sender and then goes all the way to the receiver. And the first thought bubble that the arrow goes through from the sender is something called encoding. Because the sender, inside our brain, we have an idea or a concept. And before we give it to the receiver, we have to encode it. We have to put it into words. We have to put it into actions. We have to put it into gestures. We have to somehow encode it. And then once it's become encoded, it becomes something called the signal. So that signal could be words or sounds or hand gestures or other kind of communication, and that all becomes the signal. And then that signal doesn't immediately go inside the receiver's brain, and it is, but rather it first has to be decoded. So just like we encoded an idea or a concept that we have in our brain into a signal, that signal has to be decoded by the receiver for them to understand, hopefully, what we are trying to communicate. As I was saying, very, very simple idea. Or very, very simple model rather, but in the simplicity lies the magic. And we use this all the time. When I'm trying to communicate a concept to my students at a school, I happen to teach mathematics at a secondary school, then first I have to understand what I'm trying to do, so I have to have an idea or a concept about what we need to do. And then I need to encode that idea or that concept in some way, shape or manner. It could be an explanation, it could be an anecdote, it could be an example on the board, it could be something for them to try, something that I need to encode my idea into a signal, and that signal I give to the students in either by showing them or telling them or making for them. and then they have to encode, they have to sort of transcribe what it is that I've put together for them into the ID, and then hopefully it goes into their brain, they practice it, and they become good at it. Everybody's happy. Now, the reason this came to mind is because I recently, I think it was last Saturday, very recently anyway, attended a seminar in Kent by, of all places, never been Kent before. That was my first visit to Kent. It's very, very green and quiet and countryside-y. Lovely place. So I went there to attend a seminar by representative from the European Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Federation, EGJJF. Check them out. They're doing great things. And his name is Michel Verhoeven, and he's a first degree black belt under Rickson Gracie and Harold Harder out in Amsterdam. I've met Michel many years ago at a Rickson Gracie seminar in Amsterdam. Apologies, Michel is not from Amsterdam, but I met him in Amsterdam. And I was really impressed by his jiu-jitsu, but also by his attitude towards the martial arts and life in general. So when I found out that he comes to do seminars as a representative of the EGJJF here in the UK, I jumped at the opportunity to go and meet him and discuss what the federation is about and how to join and what kind of services they offer and all these things. But also, of course, learn from him, because I was positive that the jiu-jitsu that he had to teach was top-notch. And I was not disappointed. I was very happy with the seminar. Now, in the seminar, one of the things that he showed, one of the many things that he showed, was how to counter modern guards such as the De La Riva guard and the Spider guard. Obviously, these are not completely modern guards, but they definitely are experiencing a revival. They're being used massively throughout the competitive jiu-jitsu world. And it just reminded me of the techniques that he showed were very simple and to the point, very much like the model that I was discussing. But one of the questions that came up were, like, I'm inside somebody's guard, somebody's open guard, and I'm keeping my lead elbow and my lead knee connected, and I'm putting pressure against their thigh. I'm trying to sort of standing inside their open guard. But what should I do about them hooking my knee? So, like in the De La Riva guard, or putting their foot on my hip or my biceps, and hence stopping my pass. And it's a fair question. So that was what we call the frame. That's how they are trying to communicate their question to Michel, the instructor at this point. So the frame is, I am doing this, my opponent is doing that, now what do I do? Okay, so if we were to put this in what we used to do what we studied at university about reframing and rephrasing, the reframe would be, instead of saying, I am doing this, my opponent is doing that, you should think of it as, I am doing this, and I am allowing my opponent to do that. Now what do I do? Okay, it's a very subtle change, but very powerful at the same time. So let's re-examine the question. The original question is, I'm keeping my lead elbow and knee connected to exert pressure against their guard, but what should I do about the opponent hooking my knee or putting their foot on my hip or biceps to stop my pass? The new question becomes, I am keeping my elbow and knee connected to exert pressure against the guard, but what should I do about me allowing him to hook around my knee or put their foot on my hip or my biceps to stop my guard pass? Not only does this rephrase and reframe make the answer much simpler, but you actually suddenly you gain ownership of both the problem and the solution as soon as you start thinking of it this way. I remember many years ago, I was still a kid in secondary school, and the teacher asked, does anyone know how to change a sentence to passive form? And we all sort of looked at each other like, yeah, we all know how to do that. From, I ate the cake, very good example, to the cake was eaten. I broke the plate to the plate was broken. Yeah, we all know how to do that. And then he gave us a follow-up question. So does anyone know why we would do that? Why we would change a sentence into passive form? And, kids being kids, we knew how to do it. We knew how to get the grades, but none of us really understood the depth of it. We didn't. So after much silence, he explained to us the reason we would change a sentence to passive form is to shift the focus of the sentence from the object to the subject. So instead of focusing on who ate the cake, I ate the cake. So that was the focus of the sentence. The cake was eaten. Now it becomes, the focus is the cake and what happened to it. I really want cake now. Anyway, cake aside. That lesson really stayed with me throughout life because I realized that it's so subtle, such a small subtle change can change the whole sentence, what you do with it, and how it affects your thinking about the whole thing. So I don't think I need to tell you exactly what Michel's suggestion was to how to counter for example, the Delhiva guard. You must have guessed it by now. His first suggestion is, don't think of it as, what do I do about him hooking, or my opponent hooking around my knee, but rather think about, what should I do about me allowing them to hook around the knee? Instead of, what should I do? How do I counter the spider guard, them putting their foot on my hip or on my bicep? The first thought should be, what am I doing that's allowing them to land their foot on my hip or to land their foot on my spider guard? If you always keep that in mind, if you always put the onus on you and put the not just the problem but the solution as well in your own hands, I really think it changes your jiu-jitsu. It changes the way you look at, well, not just jiu-jitsu, all martial arts. It puts the solution in your hands, as I said earlier on. Michel had really good suggestions about how to put your body, how to position yourself, how to angle your lead knee and the rest of your body towards your opponent, so that them having that foot in the first place is not as feasible. There are ways of how to get the foot off your Delahiva, of your lead leg, of how to get the foot off the hip, of how to get the foot off the bicep. But the first thing you should always be asking yourself, what could I have done to prevent this in the first place? Alright, just before I let you go, I just wanted to drop the hyperlink URL, the link to some more information about the European Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Federation. As you may have guessed, it's www.egjjf.com. In a nutshell, this is the European arm of what Hicks and Gracie started in the US, which is the Jiu-Jitsu Global Federation, JJGF. You can still join the JJGF, but if you live in Europe and you want to have close contact with a few of Master Hicks and Gracie's black belts, who have been approved, that they provide all the full program of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, whether it's self-defense, kids Jiu-Jitsu programs, women's self-defense, and tournaments that are organized according to the JJGF rules. You can contact the European Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Federation through their website. They recently had the EGJJF Open in Holland, and I think they've got plans for the autumn camp. I think they're planning on having more than one camp a year, but the one that's coming up soonest is going to be end of September, 22nd to the 24th of September, which is going to be at a massive judo academy. It's going to span over those 3 days, 22nd, 23rd, 24th. Yeah, so there's a ton of information on the egjjf.com website. You can find out about where they are in Europe. There are different locations around Europe, and you can contact them about all kinds of things. Anyway, just because I mentioned Michel and his seminar in this month's podcast, I thought I'd give you a link that you can follow up on. Excellent. Thank you very much.